want to welcome all of our families that are welcomed us into their home today for this sacred liturgy. So greetings to all of you at home, and you're with us in spirit. I noticed particularly the bulletin this morning, and it's a beautiful picture of a church, and it says, the quote from the conclusion of the first reading today, "My house shall be called a house of prayer for all people." You know, that has tremendous ramifications for all of us. Now, that was a brave statement that Isaiah made. You see, the people of Israel had just come home from exile, exiled by foreigners, people who had persecuted them and exiled them, defiled their temple. And here, in the first reading, it says, "Any foreigner who comes to me with a sense of justice and kindness and goodness shall be one of my own." And thus it concludes, "My house shall be a house of prayer for all peoples." Tremendous ramifications for all of us as we on earth anticipate what it might be like in heaven and how we might prepare ourselves for that, in knowing that in our hearts and homes, in our churches, all people are welcome or should be. You know, Jesus had many temptations, although there doesn't say the devil was always there. The time, in fact, though, when Peter said, "Lord, nobody's ever going to touch you. You're not going to die. You're not going to suffer." And he said, "Get behind me, Satan. You're speaking like a man, not like God." He was tempted in lots of ways. The Pharisees tempted him. Today he was tempted. He's walking along, tired side on, and so supposedly, for once, maybe minding his own business. And this lady comes along, a Canaanite woman. Disciples try to discourage her. Said, "Don't bother him, he's too busy. He's in prayer. Don't bother him." And she said, my daughter is terribly sick, possessed with a demon. You've got to help her." You know, we might think, well, was Jesus the only person? Maybe that was her court of last resort. How many sorcerers or doctors or people that were known to be of healing could have, she maybe attempted to ask for help, and nothing happened. Nothing changed. And Jesus said, "I'm sorry," but he says, "I've come to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and you're a Canaanite woman." There's a couple of undertones here that we might look at. First of all, she was a stranger. She was a Gentile. And in the time Matthew wrote this gospel, they were having a difficult time, the early church, in accepting the Gentile converts. As you know, anything about the Council of Jerusalem, Peter and Paul had this little bit of a tiff, if you will. Peter said, was a little reluctant. And it was over the whole thing of circumcision. And Paul insisted that you don't have to become Jewish to become Christian. You don't have to follow Mosaic law to follow Christ. That's how that undertone is. So Matthew's audience had experienced somewhat of that they had a difficult time. Second thing is, she was a woman. And she overstretched her boundaries, approaching a man for a favor. Probably most likely she was a widow, down at the lowest rung of the social economic status. And she had the gall to ask Jesus for help. It seems a bit strange, doesn't it, that the response he made? It doesn't seem like Jesus was out of character. And maybe he was being troubled, the fact that he was a very faithful Jew and that he really was intent on saving the people of Israel. But somehow she inserted herself into his life. Maybe it was a bit of a shock therapy. First of all, for us, faith, hope, and belief is an effort. The woman made the effort when often we feel it is our right and privilege to have faith. That rather than dismiss her or walk away, he engaged her in a conversation and allowed the disciples, those Jewish people, to witness this one-act play with a happy ending. God's salvation is a plan for all peoples. What ramifications does that have for us today in our society? All want to be invited and to be included, to have a seat at the table of life, of justice, of love. All of us want a place at the table. We know what that might be like. 14 guests show up at our home, and there's only 12 placemats. Don't we find an extra space to include all? Sometimes I cringe, say, if I'm at a wedding or a funeral as a guest, and I hear the presider announce right at communion time, if you're not in the state of grace, you're not welcome to come to communion. Or if you're not Catholic, I'm not saying you should give permission. All I'm saying is, why is that so necessary to say such things? I cringe, and I almost thinking, I'm embarrassed by such statements. So uncalled for, but it's a statement of exclusion on purpose. And I don't think Jesus ever showed or manifested that at any time. We, like the disciples, could say to the strange woman, you have no right to be badgering and helping and are asking for help. Is this the voice of the woman who with her children have come to our shores for safety and a new life? Is there any different than the Canaanite woman who just asked to be accepted and her daughter be healed? Or in our church, what does it mean without being disrespectful? Does everyone in our church have a seat at the table? Or all are welcome in the same way? Or are some relegated to the back room? Are some more equal in our church than others? Or are we comfortable living with this? If not, how long can we bear it? If not, we can't bear it. How will we understand heaven when we experience so much something that's different on earth? The story of the Canaanite woman is the story of all of us. All of us have knelt down before God in our desperate times, and we've asked for help. And we've had our families to pray with us and to be with us. And I want us to think of Jesus, placing ourselves in his shoes. When those who come asking for help, whatever it might be, a place at the table, and we respond to those, never in all of Israel have I seen such faith. Isn't that our testimony to God's presence in our life?